What if the safest place you knew turned out to be a lie? What if the people you trusted most were hiding the darkest intent? This isn't just another small-town tragedy. It's the story of how a peaceful American suburb, known for its college town charm, was rocked by a murder so cold, so unfathomable, it shook the nation and forced parents to ask, do we ever really know our children? Welcome to Crime Teller Midnight. I'm your host, and tonight we dive deep into the horrifying betrayal of Skyler Neese, a teenager who trusted her best friends and never came home. Morgantown, West Virginia. Tucked away in the Appalachian Hills, it's the kind of place where neighbors wave, kids walk to school, and college students flood the local diners. West Virginia University brings youthful energy and a sense of security. Morgantown isn't just anywhere USA. It's the picture of wholesome American life. But on July 6, 2012, that illusion shattered. Skyler Neese was 16, brilliant, beaming, beloved, a high school sophomore with a 4.0 GPA and dreams as bright as her future. She was the only child of Mary and Dave Neese. Her father, a hospital worker, her mother, a loyal employee at a medical lab. Skyler was their pride and joy. She wasn't just academically gifted. She had charisma. Her classmates described her as witty, vibrant, and fiercely loyal. She wasn't a rebel. She didn't drink, didn't sneak out, until the night she did. And that night would be her last. On the evening of July 5th, Skyler finished her shift at Wendy's, exchanged the usual cheerful goodnights with her co-workers, and headed home. By all appearances, it was a normal night. She told her parents she was exhausted. No red flags. She kissed them goodnight, went into her room, and shut the door. They never saw her again. The next morning, her door was still closed. Mary and Dave didn't worry at first. Maybe she was sleeping in. Maybe she was worn out from the double shift. But by late afternoon, the silence in the house began to feel unnatural. When Dave opened her door, the bed was untouched. Her window? Cracked open. The screen? Removed and hidden in the closet. Outside, a small bench beneath the window told a chilling story. Skyler had snuck out, but she hadn't come back. Phone calls followed. Skyler's cell, no answer. Her best friend Sheila, no idea where she went, she claimed. Skyler's job called. She hadn't shown up. That was the final straw. Dave picked up the phone and dialed 911. My 16-year-old daughter snuck out last night. She never came home. She's not at work. No one can reach her. I'm scared to death. The call that would begin a 6-month nightmare. This is the moment every parent dreads. That creeping realization that something is wrong. Not just teenage rebellion, not just a bad day. Something is seriously wrong. The Neeses weren't helicopter parents. They gave Skyler her space. But now, they were spiraling. Was it a runaway, a prank, or something much worse? That afternoon, Sheila called Skyler's mum. Her voice was nervous, shaky. "Is Skyler back?" Mary answered. "No. And we've already called the police." A pause. "I need to tell you something." Sheila admitted Skyler was with her and another friend, Rachel, the night before. They went for a drive, smoked some marijuana, and dropped Skyler off a few blocks from home. But here's the twist. When investigators pulled apartment surveillance footage from the Neese's building, they saw something that blew a hole in that story. At 12:30 a.m., roughly 30 minutes after Sheila claimed to have dropped her off, a car pulled up near the Neese apartment. Skyler emerged from the shadows and voluntarily got into the back seat. No coercion, no panic. She was running to someone or something. Here's the part that stings. When young people are in danger, we assume it's strangers, a creepy van, a predator lurking in the dark. But Skyler didn't get into a stranger's car. She got into a friend's, one she trusted with her life. And that's what makes this case so terrifying. The real monsters weren't lurking outside. They were already inside her life. When someone disappears, the first question we ask is how. But soon after, a darker question creeps in. Why? Skyler Neese didn't vanish without a trace. She walked away, into the night, into a car, into the company of people she called friends. But behind the smiles and inside jokes was a friendship that was already unraveling, and no one knew just how far it would fall. Skyler had two best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The three were inseparable. From middle school to high school, they shared everything. Late-night texts, weekend hangouts, secrets no one else was allowed to hear. But as time passed, something shifted. Sheila and Rachel grew closer to each other, and Skyler, once at the center of the trio, started to feel like an outsider in her own friend group. Friendships at 16 can feel like life or death. Loyalty is currency, exclusion is war. And when three become two, there's always one left watching, wondering when everything changed. Skyler began noticing small slights, being cropped out of photos, left out of inside jokes, ignored during hangouts. Her so-called best friends were icing her out, and she was keeping score. Later, investigators would discover Skyler's diary. Inside were confessions that now feel like foreshadowing. She wrote about feeling abandoned. She questioned why Sheila and Rachel had started dressing alike, why they made plans without her, and why she suddenly felt invisible. One entry, in particular, stood out. "I'm always in the corner. They don't even try to hide it anymore." That sense of betrayal ran deep. On the night of July 5th, when Sheila and Rachel texted Skyler asking if she wanted to sneak out and smoke weed, she said no. It wasn't just about the weed. It was about the principle. She was tired of being used, of pretending everything was okay. She knew something was off. She didn't trust them. But they kept texting, pushing, teasing, guilt-tripping. This is how toxic friendships work. Not through shouting or slaps, but through subtle pressure, faux affection, and guilt. And eventually, Skyler gave in. We can only imagine what she was thinking as she slid the screen out of her window, hid it in her closet, and climbed out into the night. Was it one last attempt to fix things? Was it closure? Or did she already sense she was making a mistake? We'll never know. When Sheila first spoke to police, she painted herself as a concerned friend. She said they texted a bit the night Skyler disappeared. Nothing more. Later, she admitted they had gone out to drive and smoke together, but claimed they'd dropped Skyler off a few blocks away. But here's the thing, the timelines didn't match. Security footage caught Skyler getting into their car at 12:30 a.m., long after Sheila claimed she'd gone home. So what were they hiding? What's chilling is how calm both girls appeared in the weeks after. They went to school, they laughed, they posted selfies, they joined search parties. Sheila even tweeted things like, "Come back, Skyler, we miss you." Imagine that. Knowing what you did and lying to the world with a smile. It's a kind of sociopathy that's hard to comprehend. Despite the red flags, police were stuck. With no body, no weapon, and no confession, it was technically still a missing person case. And because Skyler was seen voluntarily entering the vehicle, the case lost urgency. But her parents didn't give up. They printed flyers, held vigils, knocked on doors. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the answer they were begging for was just across town, sitting in a classroom, laughing with friends, pretending to grieve. Morgantown struggled with the truth. People whispered that Skyler had probably run away. Maybe she'd gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. Maybe she'd show up any day now. But behind closed doors, her parents knew better. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't teen drama. Their daughter was gone, and the only people who knew what really happened were playing a twisted game of silence. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from police work. It doesn't come from evidence. It comes from within, bursting out when the weight of guilt becomes unbearable. That's exactly how the mystery of Skyler Neese's disappearance finally began to unravel. Not through confession, but collapse. Months passed. The Neese family continued their desperate search. Posters lined every wall, telephone poles, bulletin boards. Their living room became a war room, leads, maps, photos, timelines. But none of it mattered. Morgantown police, lacking hard evidence or a crime scene, categorized Skyler's case as a runaway. The urgency faded. So did the media coverage. Behind the scenes, though, her parents knew. Skyler would never do this. They kept pressing, kept demanding answers. But the people who had the answers were living like nothing had happened. What happens when teenagers are asked to bear an adult crime? Sheila and Rachel had returned to their regular routines: school, social media, cheerleading practice. They laughed, they texted, they posted filtered selfies over quotes about heartbreak and friendship. They were playing roles, hoping no one would notice the cracks beneath their facades. But Rachel, she couldn't hold it together. In December, 6 months after Skyler disappeared, Rachel's world began to collapse. Her behaviour changed drastically. She became volatile, erratic, and violent at home. She started screaming at family members, destroying property, breaking down in sobs she couldn't explain. Her mother, terrified and confused, finally did what many parents wouldn't dare. She called the police on her own daughter. My daughter. She's 16. We can't control her anymore. Rachel was taken into psychiatric care, and for a few days, everything went quiet. In stories like this, guilt isn't always loud. It simmers. It eats away in the quiet moments. The sound of your own heartbeat becomes unbearable. That's what Rachel was facing. Night after night of remembering, replaying, pretending, but she couldn't pretend anymore. After being released from the psychiatric facility, Rachel made a decision that shocked everyone. She walked into the Morgantown Police Department, looked the officers in the eyes, and said, "I know where Skyler is. I'm ready to tell you everything." Just like that, the wall of lies collapsed. Rachel admitted it all. Skyler didn't vanish. She was lured, set up, executed. On July 5th, Rachel and Sheila had planned to kill her. That wasn't hyperbole. It wasn't a sudden outburst of violence. It was premeditated. They'd chosen the time. They'd chosen the place. They'd chosen the weapon. And they convinced Skyler to come along by acting like friends again. What's horrifying is how casually cruel this plan was. They didn't fight. They didn't scream. They smiled, picked her up, chatted like old times, all while knowing exactly what they were about to do. They even brought the tools: knives, bleach, towels, garbage bags, and a shovel. This wasn't spontaneous. It was surgical. Rachel described how the 3 girls drove to a remote forest just across the border into Pennsylvania, a spot they had visited before. Sheila parked. They laughed, smoked, pretended everything was normal. Then came the setup. Sheila told Skyler, "I forgot my lighter in the car. Can you go grab it?" Skyler, ever helpful, still unaware, turned her back and walked away. That's when they struck. 2 knives plunged into Skyler's back. She staggered forward, gasping, trying to escape, but they chased her down. Skyler collapsed, clutching at her wounds. She looked up at the girls she called her best friends and asked the only question that mattered. Why? There was no answer. Just more stabbing. Rachel held her down. Sheila kept stabbing, neck, chest, abdomen, mechanical, unrelenting. Let's pause here. Because this is no longer about teen jealousy or drama. This is something else, something far darker. It's about betrayal taken to its furthest possible extreme. It's about a warped sense of loyalty turned into calculated execution. Skyler didn't just die. She was hunted by people who once swore they'd never let anyone hurt her. After Skyler stopped moving, they tried to bury her, but the ground was too hard, so they dragged her deeper into the woods, covered her body with branches and stones, and left her there, like discarded trash. Then they drove home, back to Morgantown, back to their lives, back to pretending. A confession is one thing. A conviction is another. After Rachel broke down and told police everything, the case took a hard turn. But the nightmare wasn't over. Because one girl confessed. The other doubled down on the lie. This wasn't just about justice now. It was about confronting someone who could smile at a funeral, knowing full well they caused it. After Rachel's confession, police immediately secured a warrant and headed into the forested area she described, just across the Pennsylvania border. She had been specific. The trail, the spot where they parked, the direction they dragged Skyler's body. The detectives didn't want to believe it. But as they followed Rachel's directions, they found exactly what she had described. Under a makeshift layer of twigs and brush were human remains. Dental records later confirmed it. Skyler Neese had been found. For most families, the idea of closure brings comfort. But for Skyler's parents, finding her body didn't close anything. It tore it open all over again. Now, their worst fears were real. Their daughter hadn't run away. She hadn't been taken by a stranger. She'd been betrayed, slaughtered by the very people she trusted most. Armed with Rachel's confession and the discovery of the body, detectives turned their focus to Sheila Eddy. They watched her social media. They monitored her behavior. And what they saw was chilling. She tweeted things like, "Always keep your cool. We really did go on 3. And perhaps most haunting of all, no one on this earth can handle me and Rachel. If you think you can, you're wrong." These weren't the ramblings of a panicked teen. These were the smirking taunts of someone who thought she got away with murder. What made Sheila so dangerous wasn't just the crime, it was her normalcy. She went to class, she joked with teachers, she posted about clothes, boys and music. She even helped pass out missing person flyers for the girl she helped kill. This level of disconnect is rare. It's not just deception. It's a kind of emotional detachment that even seasoned investigators found hard to understand. Despite Rachel's confession, prosecutors moved cautiously. They needed to secure a plea deal and ensure that Rachel would testify truthfully. Rachel was officially charged with second-degree murder. She accepted a plea bargain in exchange for full cooperation. She was the linchpin in the case against Sheila. But the clock was ticking. Sheila was still walking free, still attending school, still tweeting like she lived in a teen drama, not a real-life horror story. Knowing Sheila would never confess, police built their case piece by piece. They subpoenaed phone records, GPS logs, and text messages. Rachel provided insight into planning, the knives hidden under clothes, the bleach and towels brought in advance, the false stories they rehearsed. It was clear This was no accident. This was first-degree murder. And now, with Rachel's cooperation, the DA had enough. On May 1st, 2013, nearly 10 months after Skyler's death, Sheila was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, her expression in the mugshot, stone cold. What rattled people most was how unbothered Sheila seemed. No tears, no panic, no signs of remorse. The girl who once called Skyler her sister now faced life behind bars for orchestrating her brutal death. But even then, she never broke, never cried, never explained why. The courtroom would have to drag that answer out of her. As news broke, the story went viral. 2 teenage girls, cheerleaders, honor students, best friends, had murdered their third friend in cold blood. It shattered every suburban illusion. The media painted them as a modern-day Heathers or Mean Girls turned homicidal. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. And it wasn't over. For Mary and Dave Neese, this wasn't just about punishment. It was about protecting others. They began pushing for legislative change, demanding better response systems for missing teens, not just runaway labels. Skyler's law was introduced, aiming to alert the public faster when teens vanish under suspicious circumstances. Even in death, Skyler's story was changing the world, but justice still had to be served, and the trials were about to begin. In the courtroom, guilt doesn't always look guilty. Sometimes it wears lip gloss. Sometimes it giggles with friends. And sometimes it stares blankly ahead, as if nothing happened at all. This wasn't just a trial about murder. It was a trial about how far deception can go and how cold a teenage killer can be. In January 2014, Rachel Schoaf appeared before a packed courtroom. The girl who once screamed and shattered plates at home now stood still, pale, composed. She was there to accept a plea deal, second-degree murder, with a promise to cooperate fully against her co-defendant, Sheila Eddy. Rachel didn't fight the charges. She didn't try to deflect. In front of Skyler's parents, whose eyes were locked on her the entire time, Rachel spoke softly but clearly. "I'm so sorry. No words can express the remorse I feel. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I pray every day for forgiveness. I miss her." Her voice cracked. For a moment, it looked like guilt had finally pierced the surface. But for Mary and Dave Neese, it wasn't enough. It's easy to say sorry when the consequences are real. But for Skyler's parents, words didn't matter. Their daughter was still gone. Her bed was still empty. Her toothbrush still sat untouched. Her room still quiet. What they wanted, what they needed, was justice. Rachel was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. It was a deal some called light, but prosecutors knew they couldn't have built the case without her. She was both a killer and a key witness, a paradox the justice system had to accept. Now, all eyes turned to Sheila. Sheila Eddy maintained her innocence for nearly a year. She smiled in school, partied on weekends, tweeted about being misunderstood. Even after her arrest, she showed no remorse, no tears, no explanation. Until finally, on January 24th, 2014, she changed her plea to guilty. The courtroom was silent as Sheila Eddy stood, eyes blank, voice robotic. "I plead guilty to first-degree murder." No apology, no emotion. It was as if she was reading from a grocery list. This moment stuck with everyone in that courtroom. Not because of what she said, but how she said it. No emotion, no remorse, not even a flicker of regret. Just cold compliance with the process. Sheila Eddy had helped plan and carry out one of the most senseless teenage murders in American history, and she didn't seem to care. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. A life behind bars, where her only freedom would come from staring at walls, not screens, where her only visitors would be guards, not friends. She had thrown away her future for a crime that still had no rational explanation. After the sentencing, Dave Neese stood outside the courtroom, his voice steady but heavy with grief. "We are not happy. This is not a happy day. We will never see Skyler again. But justice has been served, and that's all we ever asked for." His wife, Mary, nodded quietly beside him. You could see it in her eyes, relief and sorrow colliding. They had fought, they had screamed, they had endured endless nights of not knowing. Now they knew, and the truth hurt more than the uncertainty ever could. Trials don't heal. They document, they judge, they end chapters, but they don't erase them. What Sheila and Rachel took that night wasn't just a life. It was peace. They left behind trauma, confusion, and questions that no sentence could answer. Why? Skyler's final question still hung in the air, unanswered. But at least now, her killers were no longer pretending. The public reaction was explosive. People across the country followed every update, horrified that two teenage girls could commit such a gruesome crime, and for such a petty reason. The motive? They simply didn't like her anymore. That's what Rachel eventually admitted, that Skyler was a third wheel, a problem, an inconvenience, so they killed her. Not for money, not for revenge, just to be rid of her. This wasn't just about murder, it was about emotional cruelty, peer dynamics, and the terrifying power of exclusion. Teen girls aren't often associated with cold-blooded violence, but this case shattered that illusion. It reminded the world that cruelty wears many faces, and sometimes they smile back at you. Some stories don't end with a sentence, even after the killers are behind bars, even after the cameras leave the courtroom. The real aftermath begins, not in breaking news, but in broken hearts, quiet homes, and the ripples that spread through a town forever changed. Skyler Neese's murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call, and the echo of that night is still being felt today. In the days after the sentencing, Morgantown tried to return to normal. But how do you go back to routine when the very idea of normal has been shattered? Students who once shared classrooms with Skyler, Sheila, and Rachel now walk through hallways with a kind of unease. Teachers who once joked with the girls struggled to reconcile who they thought they were with who they turned out to be. Parents locked eyes across grocery aisles, silently wondering, could this happen in my family? Because here's what made this case so haunting. It didn't happen in a broken home. It didn't involve gangs or troubled teens from the fringes. It happened between friends, in a good school, in a quiet town. We want to believe certain places are immune to evil, that if we raise our kids right, live in the right neighborhood, watch the right signs, it can't happen here. But Skyler's story ripped that illusion apart. She was smart, loved, disciplined. Her killers were popular and involved. There were no warning sirens until it was too late. This wasn't a failure of parenting. It was a failure of understanding just how complex teenage emotions can be. Skyler's parents, shattered but determined, decided their daughter's death would not be meaningless. They began lobbying for legislative reform in West Virginia. At the time of Skyler's disappearance, state law didn't allow Amber Alerts to be issued unless a child was believed to have been abducted. Because Skyler was thought to have left voluntarily, no alert was triggered. Mary and Dave wanted to change that. They helped introduce Skyler's Law, which would broaden the criteria for Amber Alerts, ensuring that missing children under suspicious circumstances would trigger immediate action, abduction or not. In 2013, less than a year after her death, the law was passed unanimously in the West Virginia House and Senate. Skyler's name was now tied to hope, to prevention, to a chance for other kids who might otherwise be lost in silence. Not every parent has the strength to stand on podiums with cameras in their faces, reliving their worst day over and over. But Mary and Dave Neese did. They channeled their pain into purpose. And that's something extraordinary, because it would have been easier to disappear, to go silent. Instead, they became voices for the voiceless. Skyler's case didn't just change laws. It forced conversations, TV specials, podcasts, documentaries. Everyone was trying to understand how this could happen. Some focused on the psychology of teenage girls, others on the digital age, how social media masks real emotional pain. But most agreed on one thing. Something fundamental was broken. Sheila and Rachel lived online as much as they lived in the real world. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, constant updates, curated images, filtered friendships. Even after killing Skyler, they posted casually. Jokes, selfies, memes. It was as if the murder existed in a separate dimension, never touching their digital personas. This disassociation between reality and image is something psychologists now study in depth. Because behind the screens, some teens are suffering, seething, or worse, planning. Teen mental health isn't just about sadness. It's about emptiness, pressure, isolation in a world that's supposed to be more connected than ever. Sheila and Rachel weren't textbook psychopaths. They were angry, entitled, desperate to feel in control. And somehow they decided murder would fix what they couldn't explain. Of course, the media circus didn't help. Some shows romanticized the case, calling it the real mean girl's murder. Others vilified Rachel as weak, Sheila as evil, Skyler as naive. But the truth is more complicated. Skyler was a real girl, with flaws, with emotions, with a life. She wasn't just a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a person, not a character in someone else's narrative. Morgantown moved forward, but scars remain. The school planted a tree in Skyler's memory. Her friends, not the ones who betrayed her, but the ones who stood by, gathered for yearly vigils. Her name now means something more. It means never forget. It means speak up. It means listen closely to the silence behind the smile. Because sometimes that's where the truth is hiding. What makes two teenagers, seemingly ordinary, pick up knives and murder their best friend? Not out of revenge, not for money, but because they didn't like her anymore. This wasn't a horror film. It wasn't fiction. It was the reality behind one of the most senseless and cold-blooded crimes in recent American history. And to understand it, we have to go inside the minds of Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf and face what most of us don't want to admit. Teenagers, too, are capable of monstrous things. The hardest part for investigators, parents, and the public alike was the why. There was no abuse, no toxic home life, no long-standing feud. So, what caused two intelligent middle-class girls to plan and execute the murder of their closest friend? According to Rachel's later confession, we just didn't like her anymore. That was it. No more. No less. It wasn't jealousy over a boyfriend. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was rejection disguised as rage, and emotional immaturity disguised as control. Teenagers live in a heightened world. Every emotion feels like the end of the world. A friend not texting back can feel like betrayal. a social snub like abandonment. But what made this different was the escalation. Most teens sulk, cry, block each other online. These girls? They made a plan. After the case broke, one piece of evidence stood out. Skyler's personal diary. One entry revealed an incident that may have planted the seed of tension. One night, Skyler, Sheila, and Rachel had all been drinking at Rachel's house. The mood was light until it suddenly wasn't. Skyler claimed that Sheila and Rachel began to hook up in front of her. Skyler was shocked. She wanted to leave, but feared being seen by Rachel's mother, who was asleep in the next room. She wrote about feeling trapped, betrayed, unwanted. And after that night, the friendship slowly unraveled. What emerged later was that Sheila and Rachel were in a secret romantic relationship, something they went to great lengths to hide. Skyler, once the third friend in their trio, had become a liability. She knew too much. She saw too much. And in the twisted minds of Sheila and Rachel, the solution wasn't to create distance. It was to erase the problem altogether. Teenagers are terrified of exposure, of being seen in the wrong way, especially when their identity is still being formed. For Rachel, raised in a strict religious household, being outed as queer may have felt like a catastrophe. And Sheila, she craved control, dominance. The idea that someone held power over her, information that could then change how people saw her, was intolerable. In their minds, Skyler became a threat, not a friend. What's terrifying is how well they played the role of grieving friends. After the murder, Sheila tweeted lyrics about missing Skyler. She posted old selfies. She asked for prayers. But underneath it all, she was mocking the world. One tweet read, "No one knows the real me." Another, "We really did go on 3. 3, as in a countdown, as in 1, 2, stab. Were Sheila and Rachel psychopaths? That's still debated. Psychopathy is a clinical diagnosis. But emotional coldness, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior? They checked all the boxes. Still, some psychologists argue this wasn't full-blown psychopathy. It was extreme emotional immaturity combined with a toxic social dynamic. One girl seeking control, one girl terrified of being exposed, and one girl, Skyler, caught in the crossfire. There's a concept in psychology called peer fusion. It's when two teens become so emotionally enmeshed that they lose all sense of individuality. Sheila and Rachel didn't just bond, they fused. They created their own moral logic, where anyone who didn't fit became a target. Together, they fed each other's worst instincts until murder felt like an acceptable option. In adults, conscience is shaped over decades. In teenagers, it's still being built. That's why guidance, real emotional support, isn't just helpful. It's essential. Sheila and Rachel didn't ask for help. They didn't talk to a counselor. They didn't express rage in therapy. They suppressed it. They weaponized it. And eventually, they acted on it. When the silence finally broke, it echoed. Skyler Neese's murder wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about teenagers, trust, and the systems that are supposed to protect them. In the aftermath, schools reeled, parents panicked, and the nation asked, how did no one see this coming? University High School, where all 3 girls had once walked the halls, was flooded with media. Skyler, the victim. Sheila and Rachel, the murderers. 3 names on yearbooks that now felt like clues in a crime scene. The school released public statements about grief counselling and safety. But many students weren't just sad, they were afraid. How could 2 students laugh with them one day and kill their best friend the next? Teachers who had taught all 3 girls grappled with guilt, Could they have seen the signs? Could they have intervened? We assume evil gives off a smell, a signal, something we can see and stop. But in the case of Sheila and Rachel, there were no arrest records, no outbursts in class, no knives in backpacks. They were smart, polite, smiling, which made what they did even more terrifying, because the threat didn't come from the outside. It was already inside the building. After the truth emerged, local parents were shaken to their core. Some called emergency family meetings. Others quietly went through their children's phones at night. Suddenly, every text message and every friendship seemed like it needed decoding. What was happening in their kids' heads? Were their children safe, or worse? Were they the ones others should fear? The fear was understandable, but it led to overcorrection in some cases. Students being suspended for dark jokes, punished for moody behaviour, questioned over vague tweets. People were looking for monsters in every shadow. But the real takeaway wasn't that every teen is a ticking time bomb. It's that communication matters more than we think. Skyler's murder became a national case study in how fragile teenage emotional health can be. Suddenly, schools across the country were reassessing their mental health services. Were there enough counsellors? Were students being heard, not just taught? Were peer conflicts treated as warning signs, not just girl drama? Programs were created to teach emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and digital ethics. School districts began hosting town halls, bringing in psychologists and grief counsellors. The message was clear. We missed the signs once. We won't miss them again. The role of social media in this case was undeniable. Sheila and Rachel used Twitter like a diary, masking horror behind hashtags and emojis. And while many tweets seemed vague or performative, some read like taunts in plain sight. In response, schools began rolling out digital citizenship courses, teaching students not just how to use social media, but how to spot warning signs, report concerns, and understand the real-world consequences of online behaviour. Parents, too, were encouraged to bridge the gap. Don't just ask your kids who they're texting. Ask how they're feeling. Ask who makes them feel safe and who doesn't. This tragedy highlighted something schools rarely prioritise: emotional intelligence. We teach math, we teach grammar, but do we teach empathy? Boundaries? The power of words? Do we teach teens what to do when friendships turn toxic, when anger festers, when secrets feel too heavy? Skyler's story forced that question into classrooms across the country. Another key lesson from the aftermath was about peer reporting. Several students later admitted they'd seen red flags. Rachel acting erratically, Sheila posting dark tweets, Skyler withdrawing emotionally. But no one said anything. Why? Because teenagers are taught not to snitch. Because drama is normalised. Because when a friend says, "Don't tell anyone," they listen. In the wake of the murder, many schools began implementing anonymous tip lines and training on when to break the silence. Because staying quiet can cost lives. We often ask, why didn't she ask for help? But sometimes the real question is, why didn't we listen harder? Skyler may not have screamed for help, but her diary did. Her body language did. Her withdrawal did. The silence was full of noise. We just didn't hear it in time. What do we leave behind when we're gone? For Skyler Neese, the answer is heartbreaking and powerful. She left behind a town forever changed, a set of parents who turned grief into activism, and a legacy that now lives in every school safety bill and mental health discussion across the country. This is the part of the story that turns tragedy into transformation. Mary and Dave Neese never stopped being Skyler's parents. Even after the trial, the sentencing, the interviews, and the legislation, they were still just two people who came home to silence. Skyler's bedroom remained untouched for months, her shoes lined up just so, her favourite books still beside her bed, her laughter frozen in old videos and voicemail messages. There is no moving on. There is only moving forward, with grief in one hand and purpose in the other. One of the most powerful outcomes of the case was Skyler's law. Before Skyler went missing, Amber Alerts in West Virginia were limited to abduction cases. Because Skyler was thought to have left voluntarily, no alert was ever issued. Her parents knew from the start that something was wrong, but they had no systemic support. That's why they fought for legislative change. Skyler's law expanded Amber Alert protocols. Now, if a child is missing and in danger, even without proof of abduction, alerts can go out. It passed with overwhelming support. A rare moment of unity, born from unimaginable loss. Mary and Dave could have disappeared into heartbreak. Instead, they became advocates. They travelled, they spoke. They stood in front of cameras and lawmakers and said, "This can't happen again." Skyler was gone, but she was no longer voiceless. Her story was saving lives. After Skyler's murder, schools across the US began reassessing their emotional education programs. Conversations about toxic friendships, bullying, and emotional manipulation were no longer relegated to health class week. Curriculums changed. Student mental health was prioritized. Teachers were trained to spot emotional withdrawal, sudden behavioral shifts, and patterns of exclusion. Skyler's story became case study material in psychology courses, law enforcement training, and school safety seminars. She became more than a headline. She became a warning and a teacher. One of the most painful lessons of Skyler's story is that not all danger comes from strangers. She wasn't abducted from a dark alley. She wasn't lured by someone with bad intentions she didn't know. She willingly got into the car with her best friends. That's the part that chills everyone who hears it, because it means we need to rethink how we teach children and teens about danger. Not just don't talk to strangers, but watch who calls you a friend. Skyler's legacy also lives on in peer support programs launched in her name. Some schools now offer anonymous emotional support hotlines, confidential peer check-ins, and early intervention services. Other initiatives train students to recognize red flags, not just in themselves, but in their friends. The message is clear. If something feels wrong, say something. You don't have to wait for it to become a headline. Years after the crime, Skyler's story still resonates. Social media pages in her memory are filled with tributes, article poetry, messages from other teens who say, "Your story saved me." True crime podcasts continue to revisit the case, not for the gore, but for the lesson. That people aren't always who they seem. That silence can be a scream. That sometimes the ones who say, "I love you," are the ones to fear the most. For a long time, society refused to believe that teenage girls could be capable of calculated cruelty. We called it drama. We called it growing pains. We brushed it off as hormones and high school politics. But Skyler's case forced a confrontation. Teen girls can be brilliant and kind, and also capable of manipulation and violence. Denying this complexity doesn't protect our children. It makes them vulnerable. Skyler Neese. It's a name that used to belong to a happy, hopeful 16-year-old girl with dreams of becoming a lawyer. Now, it's a name that carries weight in legislation and policy, in school assemblies. Her death was a senseless act of betrayal, but her life and the fight for her after death is saving others. We've heard the facts. We've followed the timeline. We've seen justice delivered. But Skyler Neese's story doesn't end with prison sentences or courtroom verdicts. It lingers. It lingers in the spaces between trust and betrayal. In the quiet moments when you wonder, could it happen again? Could it happen to someone I know? And perhaps most hauntingly, it lingers in the question that was never answered. Why? What makes Skyler's story uniquely devastating is its motive, or rather, the absence of one. Rachel's admission that they just didn't like her anymore still echoes as one of the most chillingly casual justifications for murder ever recorded. It wasn't a crime of desperation, not revenge, not a fit of rage. It was a decision. Planned, discussed, executed. We often expect evil to look like monsters, creatures hiding in the shadows. But sometimes evil wears mascara, smiles in selfies, says I love you before driving you into the woods. That's what makes this story so disturbing. It wasn't that Sheila and Rachel were hiding who they were. It's that they didn't think it was wrong. Let's go back one last time. To that night. To that moment. Skyler climbed out her window, not to run away, but to reconnect. Maybe she thought they were finally including her again. Maybe she thought the rift had healed. She got in that car because she trusted them. She walked into those woods because she believed them. She died asking why. And that question now belongs to all of us. If you're a parent, this story forces you to ask the hard questions. Do I know my child's friends? Do I know who they confide in? Do I know how they feel when they're alone? And most importantly, would they tell me if something felt wrong? It's not about surveillance. It's about trust. It's not about reading their texts. It's about reading their silence. If you're a teenager watching this, you already know the pressure to belong, to keep secrets, to not be dramatic, to forgive toxic friends, to act like everything's fine, even when it isn't. Skyler probably felt all those things. She probably thought, it's not that bad. I'll be fine. But she wasn't. And if you ever feel like something's off, even a little, speak up. Even if it feels awkward, even if you're afraid they'll call you crazy, trust your gut. It could save your life. Skyler can't tell her story, so we have to. Every time we say her name, we bring meaning to what was taken away. Every time we talk about emotional abuse, mental health, or the illusion of friendship, we honor her. Silence killed Skyler. Speaking might save someone else. Today, Skyler's parents still grieve. They still speak. They still fight. Skyler's law is in place. Counseling programs continue. Her name shows up in textbooks and legislation. But more importantly, it shows up in conversations. Her story made it harder for people to ignore girl drama. It taught us that friendships can become battlegrounds, that emotional cruelty can escalate, that even in the safest seeming homes, there can be danger. In the end, this story isn't just about 3 girls in a quiet town. It's about all of us. It's about who we trust, who we listen to, who we ignore. It's about noticing the cracks before they become fractures. It's about making sure no one else has to ask the question Skyler died with on her lips. Why?